In today's world, where temptations surround us at every turn, how can Christians hold on to purity and faith? Is it still possible to find and experience true love when society normalizes fleeting pleasures and mocks God's standards? And what guidance does Proverbs 5, a chapter rich with wisdom, offer to navigate the complexities of relationships and temptation? These are questions every believer grapples with. In this video, we'll uncover the powerful truths within Proverbs 5, truths that will empower you to rise above the chaos and live a life of purpose, integrity, and faith. Proverbs 5 is a timeless beacon of wisdom, offering clarity in a world that celebrates fleeting pleasures and mocks the pursuit of purity. Today, it feels like temptations are everywhere, from social media feeds overflowing with curated perfection to a culture that glorifies instant gratification. How do we, as Christians, hold on to God's truth when the world pulls us in every direction? Proverbs 5 reminds us that God's design for purity in relationships is not about restriction, it's about freedom. His ways aren't outdated but life-giving, offering a path to peace, joy, and true fulfillment. This chapter is more than just a warning against temptation. It's an invitation to live differently, to rise above the cultural noise, and to embrace a life of integrity. Proverbs 5 provides practical wisdom on setting boundaries, guarding our hearts, and finding hope, even when we've fallen short. Whether you're single or in a relationship, this chapter holds powerful insights that can transform the way you approach love, relationships, and your walk with God. Together, let's discover how to apply these lessons to navigate life with confidence, purpose, and unwavering faith. We live in a world that constantly celebrates fleeting pleasures and instant gratification while dismissing purity, faithfulness, and God's standards as outdated or irrelevant. Think about it. From social media feeds that glorify perfection to the hookup culture that normalizes casual relationships, everywhere we turn, the message is clear. Chase your desires, live for the moment, and ignore the consequences. But at what cost? Proverbs 5 paints a sobering picture of what happens when we follow the world's way. The consequences are not just spiritual, but emotional and relational. Many are left feeling empty, burdened by shame, regret, and brokenness. Social media fosters envy and comparison. Dating apps promise instant connection, but often deliver disconnection, and the normalization of pornography distorts intimacy. These temptations are seductive, like honey dripping from forbidden lips, but they lead to bitterness and destruction. Proverbs 5 presents a challenge. Will you follow the cultural pull, or will you choose God's better way? The problem is real, but the solution is just as powerful. God calls us to live counterculturally, to reject the fleeting pleasures of the world, and to embrace His design for love and purity. The question is, will you rise above? Temptation is as old as humanity itself, but its forms have evolved with the times. In Proverbs 5, temptation is likened to honey, sweet, enticing, and seemingly harmless. But beneath the surface lies bitterness and destruction. This imagery captures the deceptive nature of temptation. It promises fulfillment but delivers regret. In today's world, this honey takes on many forms: social media's curated perfection, dating apps that promise connection but often deliver heartbreak, and a culture that normalizes. Take social media as an example. Platforms like Instagram encourage us to compare ourselves to filtered versions of other people's lives. A quick scroll can lead to feelings of envy, inadequacy, and even lust. Then there's the hookup culture celebrated in movies and music, which glamorizes casual relationships but often leaves individuals feeling used and empty. And let's not forget pornography, a trap that distorts intimacy and fosters addiction, drawing hearts away from God and damaging relationships. The allure of temptation is powerful because it appeals to our deepest desires, to be loved, valued, and fulfilled. But Proverbs 5 warns us that indulging in these fleeting pleasures leads to emotional, relational, and spiritual consequences. The forbidden woman, described in the chapter, isn't just a literal figure. She represents every temptation that pulls us away from God's best. Her honeyed words may seem appealing, but they lead to destruction. The danger lies in how subtle and normalized these temptations have become. Society tells us, it's just harmless fun, or you're young, live a little. These messages sound smooth, like oil, but they conceal the snare beneath. The result? Broken trust, fractured relationships, and a deep sense of regret that lingers long after the pleasure fades. Consider King David, whose moment of indulgence with Bathsheba led to a cascade of devastating consequences: betrayal, death, and grief. His story serves as a cautionary tale of how quickly temptation can spiral into destruction when unchecked. Yet it also reminds us of the importance of repentance and God's grace when we fall. But Proverbs 5 isn't just a warning, it's a call to vigilance and wisdom. Recognizing the lies of temptation is the first step to avoiding its trap. When we see it for what it truly is, a counterfeit of God's good gifts, we can turn away and choose differently. This means guarding what we consume, whether it's the content we watch, the relationships we engage in, or the voices we listen to. God's design for love, intimacy, and fulfillment is far greater than anything the world offers. While the world promises fleeting excitement, God promises lasting joy. True love and intimacy, grounded in God's wisdom, lead to life and peace, not regret. The choice is ours. Will we listen to wisdom or follow the siren song of destruction? If you find yourself struggling with temptation, know this: you are not alone, and it's never too late to turn back to God. Start by seeking His guidance in prayer, surrounding yourself with a supportive community, and setting practical boundaries. Freedom begins when we align our desires with His truth. What steps will you take today to choose God's path over the world's empty promises? Proverbs 5 verse 8 offers simple yet profound advice. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. This is not just a literal warning, but a call to establish boundaries that protect your heart and mind from the subtle pull of temptation. In today's world, boundaries are more critical than ever. The digital age makes temptation only a click away, and cultural pressures often mock the idea of limits. But wisdom tells us otherwise. Boundaries are not about restriction, they're about protection. Consider the story of Joseph in Genesis 39. When faced with Potiphar's wife, Joseph didn't argue or linger, he ran. His actions demonstrated the power of setting firm boundaries and the courage to act on them. In contrast, we often try to rationalize temptation, telling ourselves, just this once, or it's not that bad. But lingering at the edge of a cliff increases the chances of falling, just as flirting with temptation makes compromise inevitable. Modern examples of boundaries are everywhere. Think about social media. Do you follow accounts that glorify promiscuity, materialism, or envy? Setting a boundary could mean unfollowing those accounts and replacing them with content that uplifts your spirit and aligns with your values. In relationships, boundaries could mean avoiding situations where you might be tempted to compromise, like spending too much time alone in private spaces. The importance of boundaries is not limited to personal behavior. It also extends to the community. Proverbs frequently emphasize the value of wise counsel. Surrounding yourself with godly friends and mentors who encourage your walk with Christ provides an additional layer of protection. Accountability is not a sign of weakness. It's a recognition of the strength found in unity. The world often mocks boundaries, painting them as old-fashioned or unnecessary. But boundaries are like guardrails on a mountain road. They may seem restrictive, but they're there to save your life. Without them, we risk wandering, disconnected from God's design, and vulnerable to the traps of temptation. A real-life example comes from a young couple who committed to setting clear boundaries in their dating relationship. They decided not to spend time alone in each other's apartments and set limits on physical affection. While their peers teased them for being too strict, these boundaries allowed their relationship to flourish in trust and respect, leading to a strong foundation for marriage. Proverbs 5 verse 8 is a reminder that wisdom requires action. It's not enough to recognize the danger. You must actively avoid it. This might mean deleting an app, saying no to certain invitations, or changing your daily habits. It's about being proactive in guarding your heart, knowing that the cost of compromise is far greater than the cost of discipline. Ask yourself, where do you need boundaries in your life? Are there situations, relationships, or habits that pull you away from God's path? Take the first step today by identifying one area where you can set a boundary. Then, invite God to guide and strengthen you as you walk in wisdom and integrity. Singleness is often misunderstood in our culture. Society tends to view it as a waiting room for something better, marriage, relationships, or a sense of completion. But Proverbs 5:15 offers a different perspective, reminding us to drink water from your own cistern. This verse, while often applied to marital faithfulness, carries a deeper principle: the importance of stewarding the season God has placed you in. Singleness is not a curse or an accident. It's a sacred opportunity to grow closer to God. Consider Paul's teachings in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 32 to 35, where he emphasizes the unique advantages of singleness. In this season, you can focus on undivided devotion to the Lord, free from the distractions of marital concerns. It's a time to deepen your spiritual roots, discover your God-given purpose, and serve others in ways that might be more challenging in other seasons of life. Yet, it's easy to fall into the trap of comparison. Social media amplifies this, with engagement posts, wedding photos, and family milestones flooding your feed. The enemy whispers lies: you're falling behind, or you're not enough without a partner. But Proverbs 5 reminds us that our worth is defined by Christ, not by our relationship status. Singleness is not a time of lack, but of abundance, an opportunity to walk hand in hand with God and build a foundation for your future. Real-life examples show the power of embracing this season. One young woman decided to use her single years to travel on mission trips, mentor younger girls in her church, and start a business that glorifies God. She didn't wait for a relationship to live her life. She embraced her calling fully, trusting God's timing for everything else. Another man shared how his singleness allowed him to focus on ministry, pouring into the lives of others without distraction. Boundaries are just as important in singleness as they are in other seasons. Proverbs 5 warns us to stay far from the doors of temptation. For singles, this might mean being intentional about the relationships you pursue or the influences you allow into your life. Guarding your heart isn't about isolation, it's about protection. It's choosing to fill your time with things that honor God rather than settling for distractions that lead you away from His plan. Singleness is also a time of preparation. Just as a gardener tends the soil before planting seeds, this season allows you to prepare for what's ahead. Are you using this time to cultivate a closer relationship with God, develop your character, and pursue the dreams He's placed on your heart? Waiting is not passive, it's active, filled with opportunities to grow and thrive. Ask yourself, how are you stewarding this season of singleness? Are you using it as an excuse to wait idly, or are you embracing it as a gift from God? Trust in His timing, and remember that your value is not found in your relationship status, but in the fact that you are a child of God. Let this season be one of joy, growth, and purpose, knowing that God is writing your story perfectly in His time. Compromise often starts small: an innocent decision, a harmless indulgence, or a momentary lapse in judgment. But Proverbs 5 reveals the harsh reality of where compromise leads. It warns of the heavy toll it takes on our emotional, spiritual, and relational health. The chapter speaks of losing honor to others and dignity to those who are cruel. It describes the regret that comes when we realize the consequences of giving in to temptation. These warnings are as relevant today as they were when they were written. Take a moment to reflect on modern examples. The hookup culture, glamorized in media and normalized in society, promises excitement and freedom. But the reality is often far from glamorous. Broken trust, emotional scars, and an ever-deepening sense of dissatisfaction. Pornography, marketed as harmless or even empowering, creates an addiction that warps intimacy, damages self-worth, and distances individuals from God. These compromises may seem insignificant at first, but they erode the foundation of our worth. The story of Samson in Judges 16 illustrates this vividly. Samson's compromises, from his involvement with Delilah to his disregard for his Nazirite vows, led to his downfall. His strength was taken, his freedom was lost, and his purpose was momentarily derailed. His life serves as a cautionary tale of how small compromises can have devastating consequences when left unchecked. Yet, even amid regret, Proverbs 5 offers a glimmer of hope. The chapter encourages us to acknowledge our mistakes and turn back to God. His grace is not only sufficient to forgive, but also to restore what has been lost. In our modern world, this might look like seeking accountability, confessing struggles, and taking intentional steps to rebuild our relationship with God. Real-life stories affirm this truth. A man who compromised his values in pursuit of wealth shared how his decisions left him financially successful but spiritually bankrupt. It wasn't until he returned to God and redefined his priorities that he found true peace and purpose. Similarly, a young woman shared how a series of unhealthy relationships left her feeling broken and ashamed. Through God's grace, she found healing and was able to rebuild her self-worth on the foundation of His love. Proverbs 5 reminds us that compromise is not just about external consequences. It's about the internal toll it takes. It creates a wedge between us and God, leading to spiritual numbness and a loss of connection to His purpose for our lives. But it doesn't have to end there. God's grace is always greater than our failures. Ask yourself, are there areas in your life where you've compromised your values for temporary pleasure or approval? What steps can you take to realign your heart with God's design? The beauty of God's love is that it meets us where we are, no matter how far we've strayed. By choosing to turn back to Him, we open the door to restoration, peace, and a renewed sense of purpose. No matter how far we've strayed or how deeply we've fallen, Proverbs 5 reminds us of a profound truth. God's grace is greater than our failures. His love knows no bounds, and His willingness to forgive is not dependent on how perfect we've been, but on His unchanging character. Redemption is not just a concept, it's a reality available to anyone who turns back to God. The story of the prodigal son in Luke 15 beautifully illustrates this. A son who squandered his inheritance, made poor decisions, and found himself in despair, returned home expecting rejection. Instead, he was met with open arms, a celebration, and full restoration to his place as a son. This story mirrors God's heart toward us. When we turn back to Him, He doesn't just forgive, He restores and rejoices over our return. Modern testimonies echo this timeless truth. A young woman who struggled with addiction to pornography found herself consumed by shame and self-loathing. She believed she was too far gone for God to redeem her. Yet, through a church support group, prayer, and counseling, she experienced God's grace in a way that transformed her life. She now mentors others who face similar struggles, using her story to demonstrate the power of God's forgiveness and healing. Another man shared how years of chasing wealth and success left him spiritually bankrupt. His compromise in ethical decisions and neglect of his family led to feelings of emptiness despite his financial achievements. When he finally surrendered his life to God, he found not only forgiveness, but also a renewed sense of purpose. God restored his relationships and gave him the courage to rebuild his life on a foundation of integrity. Proverbs 5 doesn't shy away from highlighting the consequences of sin, but it also points us toward hope. The chapter reminds us that repentance is the doorway to redemption. Acknowledging our mistakes and asking for God's forgiveness allows him to step into our brokenness and create something beautiful. But redemption is not just about being forgiven. It's about transformation. God doesn't simply patch up the cracks. He makes us new. 2 Corinthians 5:17 tells us, "If anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." This transformation enables us to walk in freedom, joy, and purpose, no longer held back by the weight of our past. Ask yourself, are there areas in your life where you feel beyond redemption? What would it look like to surrender those areas to God? His grace is more than enough to cover every failure, every regret, and every wound. Start today by bringing your brokenness to him in prayer. Let his love heal you, restore you, and empower you to live differently. Redemption is not just a promise, it's an invitation to a life of freedom and peace. The climax of Proverbs 5 lies in its message of hope and urgency. It paints a vivid picture of the consequences of temptation, but also offers a lifeline through God's wisdom. Proverbs 5:21 declares, "For your ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all your paths." This verse reminds us that no matter where we are or what we've done, God sees everything, not to condemn us, but to guide us back to him. His watchful presence is both a comfort and a call to action. Think about the warnings laid out in this chapter: the bitterness of giving in to fleeting desires, the regret that lingers after compromise, and the loss of joy that comes from walking away from God's design. These truths may be hard to hear, but they are meant to wake us up and help us choose a better path. Yet, even in the midst of these warnings, Proverbs 5 offers incredible hope. God's wisdom isn't just a set of rules, it's an invitation to freedom, a roadmap to abundant life. The key moment comes when we realize that walking in obedience isn't about fear of punishment, it's about embracing the blessings and joy that come from living in alignment with God's purpose. Ask yourself, are you ready to turn away from the fleeting promises of the world and embrace God's eternal wisdom? The choice is yours. Proverbs 5 is more than just a warning against the dangers of temptation. It's a call to live a life of wisdom, integrity, and devotion to God. In a world filled with distractions, fleeting pleasures, and shifting values, this chapter serves as a guiding light, reminding us that God's design is always better. His wisdom leads not to restriction, but to freedom, not to regret, but to joy. Whether you're single, dating, or married, Proverbs 5 provides practical steps to align your life with God's purpose. It challenges us to set boundaries, avoid compromise, and embrace the beauty of purity and faithfulness. It also reminds us of the incredible power of redemption. No matter how far you've strayed, God's grace is sufficient to restore, renew, and transform your life. As you reflect on this chapter, ask yourself, what steps can you take today to walk in God's wisdom? How can you align your relationships, decisions, and heart with His truth? The journey may not always be easy, but the peace and fulfillment that come from following God's path are worth it. Proverbs 5 isn't just a lesson. It's an invitation to a life that honors God and brings true satisfaction. If this message has touched your heart or inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs encouragement. Proverbs 5 offers wisdom and hope that can transform lives, and you can be a part of sharing that truth. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and join our growing community of believers. Together, let's continue seeking God's wisdom, living with purpose, and spreading His light in a world that desperately needs it.